Rolling. Hi. You don't know me. I'm new. This is my first video. I've had YouTube ideas in my head for years at this point, and I've got a lot to say. But I abandoned all those scripts and projects because I think we need to talk about this. Since I'm new, my name is Siobhan. My friends call me Shiv, and I am in my mid-30s. I've lived through a whole lot of stuff, and I think I got a lot to say, especially to young people. And I promise you, this isn't some, oh, older person tells you how to live your life. No. This is an older person who's made a boatload of mistakes and has overcome a lot of hard times. And because I have this experience, I want to share it with people who feel lost and who feel untethered and want to try to find a grounding point to get to. I consume a lot of content on YouTube myself, and I really love kind of the dialogue that's opening up about, well, I mean, for lack of a better term, how harmful TikTok and TikTok trends and like culture is, especially for young people. So like I said, I'm in my mid-30s. I'll be 35 this year. And I grew up in a time where I was almost a fully formed adult when I first got access to the way social media is in this day and age. We started when I was a kid with like AOL and AIM and, you know, stuff that really wasn't very picture based, right? And didn't have a lot of visual. And when social media really started to develop when I was in high school, we had something called LiveJournal. Once again, mostly just words. We did a lot of blogging back in the day. Fanfiction.net. I have so much on there. But the thing is you were selling your personality. You were selling your thoughts. You were selling who you were as a person sans your face. But as social media started to get more photo-based and started to get more video-based and stuff like that, I noticed a lot of change in how we interacted with it. And one of the biggest things that just hurts me seeing young people flounder and struggle with this is the idea of being cringe. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I am a neurodivergent woman who was raised in the 90s, and my entire being is cringe. And here's the thing. I know the joke is, don't kill the cringe part of you, kill the part of you that cringes. But that genuinely is how you're supposed to approach these things. In elementary school, I was very much the weird kid. And I did get bullied a lot. And a lot of this stuff was actually stuff I couldn't control. It was a lot about my looks, a lot about my size. I'm a very petite person, much smaller than most of my classmates. And I got picked on, shoved into lockers, all that stuff. And I'm talking elementary through high school. And I want to talk about the worst year of my life, which I feel like is a pretty universal experience, which was 7th grade. Elementary school and the first year of middle school in 6th grade, I went to public school. And public school was not well suited for me. I have a lot of learning disabilities and I was not doing well. I was not properly supported. And so I went to a private school in 7th grade. It was my first year at this school, and it was a new start, you know, for little Siobhan. Let's go. It's time for me to become who everyone wanted me to be. I had a lot of voices in my head, a lot of voices in my ear telling me who I should be. And so I decided to embrace that in the year I started at my private middle school. Well, you know, I wanted to be the girly girl. I loved girly fashion. I loved girly, you know, things like makeup and having my hair nice and all of that. But I am not like a girly girl as far as the kind of social aspect of it. I'm very loud. I'm very boisterous. I love dirty humor and fart jokes and silly sounds, and I am gregarious and I take up space, which is not how a true girly girl needs to be, at least in 2003, 2002. But coming fresh off of the 9/11 attacks, really, we turned into a very tribalistic society. I remember the 90s being a lot more freeform, a lot more kind of, everyone had their own beat in a way. And then the 9/11 attacks happened. And our society became very tribalistic. It very much, we circled the wagons around the US, and the idea of being proud to be an American and being, you know, the men and women of the 1950s, right? Girls were this way, boys were this way, and that's that. I went to this private school and I immediately tried out for the cheerleading team. I wore what all the other girls wore. I did my makeup the way other girls did their makeup. I fried my hair with sun-in and flat irons. And I tried so hard to be like everybody else. And here's the thing. They knew it wasn't genuine. They knew I was not being sincere. And so while I was technically doing everything correct, I was not right. It was like they could sense I was an imposter. And while I was a little bit more socially accepted because I was trying to be like them, I was still ostracized and spoke about behind my back. And it was a very hard time for me. I was very much an ugly duckling. I was a very cute kid, and as those puberty hormones started to kick in, I got real awkward. My teeth were not great. I had started to develop acne. I started to have my very blonde hair start to turn brown, and I felt so unlike myself in this year of 7th grade that I basically dissociated my way through it. And of course, there were all sorts of underlying mental health illnesses that I had not even begun to touch. But that is not, you know, that is neither here nor there in this conversation. Because really what was so hard about that year was not being true to myself, not being the weirdo that I knew I was. I am a neurodivergent person who gets very obsessed with things, very off-the-wall things, and very niche interests, and having the passion behind things, and not just, you know, we always talk about our comfort shows, our comfort movies and stuff like that. It was never just, I know everything about this story. I know everything about the production of this. I know who was involved in every aspect of this. And as somebody who had recently discovered theater, I was very fascinated by the whole process of how things were made and the breakdown of this. What kind of cameras did they use? Who was the costumer? That kind of stuff. And no one likes movies like that when you go to a very rich private school where everyone needs to be normal, you know, but like normal rich people, not like normal everyday run-of-the-mill people. I'm talking like these people I went to school with were exorbitantly rich and were very out of touch with a lot of things. So 7th grade comes to an end and I barely limp into the end of the school year, but I'm holding on to the fact that if I can just keep up with cheerleading, I can be at least accepted by my cheer squad. Well, I don't make the team. I don't know why. I was never really told what I did wrong, despite the fact that I made it the year before, but not this year. Well, that summer I had a bit of an identity crisis. And like any teenager, prepubescent person, whatever, in the early 2000s, I went to the mall. I went to the mall to blow off some steam and take a look around as I tried to find myself, because I felt very untethered and I existed outside of my body, and my brain was never in the same room as me. And I stumbled upon a little shop we lovingly call Hot Topic. And I went in there and I saw the coolest clothes I had ever seen to that point. And something to add context to this is I was a limited 2 girly. and Limited 2 was very much kids' clothes, and I was still very much a child's body. I was a little bit of a late bloomer, and so and having been petite, I basically had to shop at kids' stores to really fit myself better. Well, Hot Topic, being kind of more junior sizing, ended up fitting me really well. And I was like, oh my God, look at these really cool pants and really interesting t-shirts and awesome accessories. And the idea of like, oh my God, the more you wear, the cooler you are. And I decided to pursue a gothic style, much to my mother's chagrin. But my mom, in one of her randomly lucid moments, recognized that this was going to be what it took to pull me out of this deep, dark place that I had been for my 7th grade year. So I got my Trip NYC pants. My mom did not spring for some Doc Martens, but I did have some Skechers combat boots. I had my Nightmare Before Christmas shirts. I had my rubber spike bracelet. I got some really cheap black lipstick and some very, very terrible black eyeshadow. And your girl felt like she was made of gold. So I started in on my goth journey, and I was, once again, relentlessly bullied for this. Going to a school of what we would call back in the day the preppy kids, right? Oh, those preps. We don't deal with preps. Well, the preppy kids didn't deal with me either. And the thing is in this journey of self-discovery and coming back to school looking like a totally different person and acting like a totally different person and being genuine at the time of who I was in a deep, dark place. Goth music spoke to me in a way that I wasn't expecting to. I loved the kind of dark, broody stuff and all that. I was a teenage girl who had just started having her period and everything sucked and no boy would pay attention to me, and you know, all the girls in my school were so mean, and it just felt like I was being true to myself in that moment. And it was the first time I really started to form an identity that wasn't who people told me to be. And in those moments, despite the fact that I was called spawn of Satan, whatever, I started to embrace it. And this is where my advice starts to come in. You know, they call me spawn of Satan, and I told them, you know, all right, I'm expecting your sacrifice for me next week, you know, and I'd start embracing it. The things they called me, I started to say, yeah, no. And is partially, in fact, because I was doing theater. And one of the main rules of improv is yes and, right? And the idea of, yes, I am that, and this. And basically creating this narrative myself. While people were saying things about me and calling me, you know, crazy and weird and, oh my God, how can you do this and all that? I'm like, I don't care. I feel great. I look great. I didn't look fantastic. I had no idea how to apply black eyeshadow. But the goth thing lasted me through the early days of high school, right? I loved Trip NYC. I loved, you know, Nightmare Before Christmas and all these very dark, spooky things. And I was furthermore accepted once we went from middle school to high school, because when we got to high school, there were a couple of new kids who got enrolled in my school, and they were all weirdos too. And we kind of turned into a little clique of, well, you know, we like each other, we like what we're doing, so here we are, going to be a little band of weirdos, you know, the island of misfit toys. And I had a theater program that I had access to finally in high school, and I became very much theater kid TM, right? If I wasn't listening to Evanescence, I was listening to Broadway show tunes, and I made my whole life essentially dark, spooky poetry and Broadway. I was determined to be an actor. And in putting on personas for theater, it was almost a very safe way for me to try those on myself, trying to figure out who I was. And improv is a very easy way to do that because you can slip in and out of character for a 5-minute scene or whatever. And it is trying on identities for size. Well, junior year comes along. And while I had watched Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and Tenchi Muyo in the 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't really what one would call a weeb at that point. But in 2006, I was introduced to Naruto. And when I say that rewrote the entire chemistry of my brain, and I became the cringiest, most insane Naruto fangirl in a school full of kids who took themselves entirely too seriously. I was a circus freak. All right? So, and I'm not talking like, oh, I just have like Naruto art on my binders, or I just wear Naruto t-shirts on my non-uniform days. I'm talking forehead protector wrapped around my neck like Tamari, Naruto running to class. And I was horrendously bullied. Looking back on it, I don't blame them. I literally fell down a rabbit hole that only Naruto Uzumaki could pull me out of. So, but in the discovery of Naruto and the ostracization that was happening to me at school, a friend of mine introduced me to the concept of conventions. Well, I'd been sewing since I was 7 years old. I loved to make Halloween costumes. I loved to make pajamas, whatever. I decided to start cosplaying. And I made my first costume in a night out of things I already had for a convention here in Atlanta called MomoCon. And, you know, my first convention was feeling like coming home. It was, here are people who are like me. Here are people who like the same things I do. And here are people who like the same things I do in the same way. And that year I went to MomoCon. I popped in on DragonCon for a few hours. And then I went to AWA, which is Anime Weekend Atlanta. Anime Weekend Atlanta, I poured my heart and soul into that costume. It was Tamari from Naruto, obviously. It was the first cosplay I made from bottom to top. And I styled my hair because I couldn't afford a wig. And I had a friend of mine make the fan for me. I put a lot of time and effort into this costume. And it was such a beautiful way to direct the passion I had about the media I consumed into a positive and productive outlet. And I'll tell you, that first time you were at a convention and someone stops and goes, "Oh my God, I love your costume. Can I get a picture?" It is like the hardest hit of drugs that you will ever have. And that was it. I was home. And I have been going to conventions ever since. The convention schedule I keep now is a little bit more metered, but I was going to at least 3 conventions a year from 2006 to 2019. And conventions were kind of my area to kind of let the weird out in an acceptable manner. And that was really lovely for somebody who still felt like they had to tamp parts of them down to interact with people. And in 2014, I met my wife. And in 2014, I was a little untethered at the time too. I didn't know what I wanted to do career-wise. I had dropped out of college twice at that point, and my theater aspirations had all but dried up, and the reality of the working world had really, really gotten me down. And one of the things, if you are a child of people who, quote, teach work ethic, the idea is that you have to look a certain way to get certain jobs. And while that is the reality of our time, is if you look, quote, unprofessional, you're not going to get a job. Well, I met my wife in 2014. We met on Tinder, and we instantly sparked, and she quickly became my best friend, and I fell in love with her so fast. And one of the reasons I fell in love with her was because she was so effortless. Like, she she had such a distinct style. She had this long, beautiful hair, had this very punk rock kind of style and a very punk rock kind of attitude of, I don't care what you think of me. I don't care what you think I look like. I don't care. I don't care. And her act of not caring was so hot that I started to really take that approach with just about anything. With, well, yeah, I'm a weeb technically 3 weekends a year when I'm in full-blown cosplay, but that doesn't mean I have to be any cooler about it when I'm not in cosplay. And one of the beautiful ways that my mother trained me was giving me a list of taboo topics whenever her friends were involved. And, you know, don't talk about this, don't talk about this, don't talk about this, nobody wants to hear about it. So I was still cutting off parts of myself well into adulthood to try to be socially acceptable. And then I met Lena, and it was kind of this pushback time. You know, I practically had my teenage rebellion at 24, 25. And it was liberating. Just wear what you want, do what you want, have fun, don't care what anyone else says, just do it, you know? And so I did. I played around with styles, I played around with makeup, I played around with my hair. I had a lot of fun. And it was just, when you realize that background radiation of what are people going to think if I do this, you realize very quickly that when you are being true to yourself and you are doing the things you love and adore and dress how you want and feel good about yourself and what you're doing, that background radiation goes away very quickly. That moment of, I don't care what people think of me. I don't. Because I like me. And honestly, that's the biggest hurdle over there, is if you feel good and you look good in your own head, don't filter that through the lens of other people, because other people have extraordinarily small minds. And there are people out there who think, well, that's unprofessional. You can't get a job that way. Look, I have this hair. I have several facial piercings. I dress loud. And I have a job. I have a full-time job. And my full-time job encourages me to be who I want to be. You know, I've got a tattoo. I've got things that I do my makeup wild, you know, and it's just like half the appeal of things like this, of this personal style, is that people realize you are being genuine. And more people are going to flock to you the more genuine and honest you are to yourself. Because most people don't like a liar. That's the reality of it. You know, the whole concept of a poser is the fact that we don't like people who are just in this for attention and they're lying about being into this. They're lying about doing this. And being genuine is the most amazing thing you can do for yourself, but also for other people. Because the more genuine you are and the more that you are comfortable and embrace yourself, the more people are going to realize they can do the same thing. I work at a bookstore, and it is a metaphysical bookstore. It's, you know, witchy, witchcraft, that kind of stuff. And I come in every day, literally just having fun with what I wear, just having fun with my style, and enjoying things that I like to enjoy. And I don't try to tamp myself down for this. I don't try to keep conversation away from things that could possibly spark any sort of outrage or whatever on the floor. I am at least told to try not to be offensive and to not swear and stuff like that because there are children present. But I will just talk. I'll just talk to people and I'll be honest with them. You know, they ask me, how do I do this? And I will give them an honest answer. What do you do in this case? I give them an honest answer. And the thing is, that honesty, that earns people's trust. And that earns respect, because you, while in a, you know, customer facing position, are being honest with them. You know, I'm not the salesperson that goes, oh, you definitely need one of everything and it'll solve all your life's problems. I'll be like, no, okay. While you can be here and wanting to get things that are for your rituals, for your, altar, whatever, there are certain things outside of this store that you need to work on. And being honest with them, being like, I'm not going to sell you a bunch of stuff if I don't think it's going to solve your problem. That's invaluable. And that kind of candor and that kind of sincerity is attractive. And there are people who have been to my store once, met me, and have basically made it a weekly occurrence since, just to talk to me. I have friends that I've made just through my job. And it is because I show up as myself. I show up as me. I am Siobhan, right? And there is no question of who I am when I come into work. It's not, okay, time to put on my work sona. It's very genuine. And I have worked a lot of jobs where I've had to cut off parts of myself to be, quote, palatable. And this is where my point stands when it comes to TikTok and it comes to TikTok culture. And it comes to the idea of palatability. TikTok is nothing but an advertising platform. It has information on there. A lot of it is incorrect. It has, content about fashion or makeup or whatever. But underlying in just about every video you can sit and scroll through is something they're trying to sell you. And the idea of being palatable and being for the masses is something they are selling you. The idea that, oh, you won't be accepted unless you're exactly like everyone else. Oh, if somebody thinks that what you're doing is cringe, you are not going to be accepted. I'm here to tell you, your band of weirdos is out there. It may not be on TikTok. Hell, when I was a kid and teenager, we found the weirdos at the mall. We found them at the arcade. And honestly, the idea that now, like, a third place for kids doesn't exist. The idea of a third place is first place is home, second place is school, and third place is where you spend your free time. And it would be, I'd go from my house to school for the day, and then I'd go to the mall and hang out and meet people and make new friends. And, I sound like such an old person being like, put the phone down and go out into meet space. But like, genuinely, the internet is wonderful in a lot of ways, but it's also really harmful. It's really harmful in the fact that you have to advertise yourself. You have to make yourself so inoffensive that no one can say something wrong about you. But the thing is, being everyone's cup of tea is a horrendous existence. Genuinely. Like, trying to cut off parts of yourself so everyone can stand every bit that you present is so obviously fake and so obviously insincere. So by saying nothing about yourself makes you unpalatable. People want to know you. People want to know what you like. People want to know the things that make you smile, make you mad, whatever. Offend people. Offend someone's delicate sensibilities with a belch, whatever. Like, just don't run that background software of going, is this my thing that gets me the positive attention I so desperately crave? Just do the thing. I'll be entirely honest. It took me a while to even get my YouTube up and going because I was scared. How are people going to think of me? How are people going to, perceive someone like me? And then I went, I don't care. I'm going to offend people. I'm going to make people really mad. I'm going to make people upset that I have opinions about certain things. But that doesn't matter because the people who need to hear me will find me and they'll need to hear me. And I don't need to be everyone's cup of tea, but I need to be a great cup of tea for the people who need it. And it's really liberating. It's really liberating to stop worrying about if you're cringe and embrace it. Because, you know, I mean, literally, like, cringe must stay. The cringe in me recognizes the cringe in you. Like, you will find your weirdos, and the people who are going to love the you present when you're being honest with yourself, they are going to love you forever. I beg that you take a good hard look at what you want. Not what the internet says you want, not what your friends say you want, not what your parents say you want, what you genuinely want. You know, scroll through a couple of different shopping sites and go, wow, I really like this style. Take a look at niche fashion ideas. Take a look at really cool makeup. Or reject all of that and take a look at, you know, how to take care of yourself in a way that's comfortable without having to feel like, oh my God, I have to put on 1,000 pounds of makeup. Whatever feels right for you, do it. Try it out. You know, give yourself the chance to be yourself. And you're going to really like what you see. Because a lot of self-hatred comes from the idea of how others perceive us. And a lot of self-love comes from the idea that I like me, so others will like me. And give it a try. Try on different styles. Try on different makeup. Try on different hairstyles, wigs, whatever. And the second you look up and you like what you see, embrace it. Look, I'm not your mom. I'm just some lady on the internet. But I do. I love you. And I love the you that you get to be. And I hope you love you too. Thanks.